Good evening, friends. I'm Rabbi Menachem Sabach of the Northeastern Jewish Center here in Doncaster. And together with Zionism Victoria, I welcome you to this evening's talk titled An Inside Scoop, Why I Quit My Job at Ben & Jerry's. I first just wanted to thank those of you who are on our panel tonight, starting with our moderator, Lexi Kowal, Susannah Levin, who quit her job at Ben & Jerry, the star of the night, Burnie, and Jason Eisner. I thank all of you for spending some time with us tonight. But before I hand over to Lexi, our moderator, I think that on behalf of all of us logged in tonight, I just wanted to thank Susanna, thank you for taking such a bold stand for Israel. You see, as Jews in the diaspora, we stand for Israel. We stand with Israel all the time because standing with Israel is an integral part of our Jewish identity. We'll speak up for Israel. We'll speak out for Israel. We'll post on social media. We'll get into fiery discussions for Israel. But quitting your job over an anti-Israel BDS policy is a different type of commitment. And for that, Susanna, I take my hat off for you. Kol hakavod, well done for being such a proud ambassador of the Jewish people. And in that merit, may God shower you with an abundance of blessings in return. Right. You've taken really a bold stance, and this is something that, we're really, really inspired by the action that you took. And that's why when I first had my initial conversation with you, I was just blown away by what you shared with me. And that's why I felt, together with the president of Zionism Victoria, that this was a story worth sharing. So thank you very much for standing proud for Israel. Thank you for spending some time with us and, zooming in live from Jerusalem, and may you be blessed with an absolute abundance. I'll now hand over to our moderator for tonight, Lexi Kowal. Please take it away.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for opening the discussion tonight. Thank you also to the growing number of people who are joining us tonight. We are recording this conversation and we'll be posting it around. So if there's anyone that who couldn't join us tonight, do feel free to share that after our conversation. For those of you joining this evening who may not know me, my name is Lexi. Professionally, I'm a consultant with a background in politics. However, tonight I'm wearing my hat as board director of Zionism Victoria. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all here to discuss this fascinating and challenging topic. We're joined here tonight by people of great influence with unique insight into the recent headlines surrounding the famous ice cream brand Ben & Jerry's statement. Whilst I imagine a lot of you joining us here tonight are likely to be up to speed on the matter being discussed, before I start, I thought it might be worthwhile sharing some insight and a bit of background into what's brought us here tonight. As you may be aware, on July 19, Ben & Jerry's, the infamous ice cream brand, announced that they would be ending sales of their ice cream in the, and I quote, Occupied Palestinian Territory. This comes in addition to the unfortunate news of their initial intent to cease business within Israel entirely before the parent company Unilever stepped in. Following their July 19 statement, Ben & Jerry has heard support from their original founders, calling it one of the most important decisions the company has made in its 43-year history. Conversely, the CEO of the parent company Unilever has sought to distance itself from the decision, and uproar and strong opposition has been heard loud and clear from the World Zionist movement, including Zionism Victoria's very own petition against the act, which we can share throughout tonight's discussion. Ultimately, whilst we can't claim to know what motivated this decision, the news that Ben & Jerry wished to cease business with Israel entirely is, as a direct result of the conflict, is distressing to all. And Zionism Victoria believes that this news can't go without condemnation, but also discussion like we're here for tonight. Now, this brings me to tonight's opportunity to hear from experts and Susanna, who has a direct connection to this, regarding the inside scoop on recent events. It's my pleasure to introduce Susannah Levin. Susanna has worked as a graphic designer for the design department at Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream for the past 21 years. She quit her job last week upon announcement that the company had decided to pull its products from Judea and Samaria and not renew its license with its Israeli partner. Susanna has a Bachelor in Fine Arts in Advertising Design and Fine Arts from Columbus College of Art and Design. She lives with her husband and daughter in upstate New York, is what I've got here, but apparently you're zooming in from Jerusalem, so thank you. And her eldest son and his wife are Olim, and their baby daughter is the first sabra of the family. Her youngest son is proudly serving for the IDF. Thank you, Susanna, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Susanna, to start us off, I'm wondering if you could start by sharing a little bit about your story and your part in this recent Ben & Jerry's controversy. What made you take the decision to leave the organization?
So I was a contractor with Ben & Jerry's, and I worked for them for 21 years. It was kind of my own arrangement to work as a contractor rather than an employee. And I often didn't hear the inside things. I didn't attend the all company meetings, but Ben & Jerry's started to show up in the news because there was this BDS pressure campaign building up. And it's not the first time it's happened. It's happened many times before, telling them that, discouraging them, pressuring them to not sell in Judea and Samaria. And the fact that they had gone silent, that they hadn't made any announcements, anything at all on social media from the end of the Gaza war in May to early July was really significant. It was June at this point. So I started inquiring. I reached out to a friend of mine who works in PR within the company. And I said, I asked him what's happening. And he, I said, I was trying to discourage him from making this decision. He said, oh, it's not my decision. It's way, way above him. And he gave me entree into the company meeting that where they discussed it. And I learned that they were going to make some kind of move. The CEO said it could be a small move. It could be a large move. They hadn't decided yet, but he wanted input and questions. I listened to the questions of the other employees. I was watching this on recording, so I could not actively ask a question. I didn't hear any questions, where anyone was actually questioning why or protesting. And being really, as far as I know, the only really strongly identified Jew within the company, I really felt like it was upon me from being on the inside to speak up, which is what I did for the last few weeks prior to this announcement.
And when you did start speaking up, what were the responses that you were hearing within the organization? What were you met with?
First of all, I like to mention to people that I'm no scholar or anything. A lot of people say that they wouldn't be able to speak up because they don't have the knowledge, and I don't feel like I necessarily have the knowledge base either. So I started reaching out, first of all, and preparing before I spoke up. And I very, very quickly, the Jewish world got very small. I had access to really smart, knowledgeable people who were able to really set me up with good information. So when I did start speaking to higher and higher levels, I was prepared. So I didn't feel like I did it on my own, but I spoke to someone at the social mission level who, in my view, seemed to be very sold on the BDS message to begin with, and really was not open to hearing what I had to say. And I elevated up to the highest levels in the company, and I was heard out. I was given a very long meeting where I got to, say what I needed to say. But that was pretty much the end of it. And I decided early on that I at the beginning of this whole process, I said, my job is forfeit. I'm not going to keep this job. I mean, there's no way if they're going to do anything. I mean, being a designer, I might be the person asked to make the propaganda, which would be sickening, me or my coworkers. So I felt a little emboldened to just kind of step out of myself and reach out for the highest levels of the company to give them a better view of Israel.
Yeah, it's fascinating and terrifying to hear that that vision or that idea that one day you might be called upon to make the propaganda or to spread the message that you so vehemently disagreed with. How did you feel when this message started being shared within
Where
the...
do you want me to do my singing, here or there?
Sorry, if everyone could just pop their mics on mute, that would be great. But how did you feel when this message started being shared within the organization as a Jew and as a Zionist? What were your initial reactions?
Well, the first I knew of it was Monday morning after Tisha B'Av, when the announcement came out. I looked at my phone and there it was. It was kind of telling that it was Tisha B'Av when they made the final decision. I mean, it's ice cream, but for me, this was a real, 3 weeks. I mean, the 3 weeks of, from 17th of Tammuz to Tisha B'Av was exactly the time that I was doing this. So it was, I got sort of obsessed with it. So it was very striking, to come out of the fast of Tisha B'Av and learn this. My stomach sank. I knew that, of course, I was going to quit. I mean, there was just no question. I'm actually a little astounded at the response from people, because the quitting part was not a question. I mean, I couldn't work for them for a moment. But yeah, it's the whole time, the whole period of time when I knew that this was possible, it's kind of bewildering. You feel like, can I speak up? Can I, is this as big as it feels? You can question yourself. But as a Jew, I just felt like I had to assert myself.
And I know, thank you for sharing those reflections. I am impressed, and it fills me with pride as a Jew and as a Zionist to know that there are people with that strength within them, to know from the outset that you would quit when faced with this decision. I think that there would be some who would find that really challenging and conflicting, but your drive in that sense is really inspiring. And I guess one of the questions that I have when reflecting on this decision by Ben & Jerry's is, what led to it? Did you notice anything in the lead up to the decision? Is there a culture within the organization that you had been uncomfortable with prior to this? Could you talk us through kind of the lead up to the final statement?
Well, I didn't know too much about the lead up to this particular announcement, but I could say that politically within the company, there have been definitely changes over the last few years. I think that those are the changes that have been happening in corporate America in general. A new understanding of race and gender, and where everything seems to have gravity suddenly. And those of us who are just sitting there doing our job, we're like, what just happened? Or the world just changed under us. But I think the difference between Ben & Jerry's and some of the maybe other corporate companies is that at Ben & Jerry's, they really mean it. They're very strong into social justice. And I think since the time that I started there 21 years ago, I feel that the definition of social justice as perceived within an ice cream company maybe has changed. The things that, we have a social mission, and the things that we used to do when I first started, we had an ice cream flavor that was giving money to an organization that built playgrounds in poor neighborhoods. Prior to me coming there, they raised money for the Children's Defense Fund, which makes food and healthcare available to children. These are all things that are doing good, like sort of a finite amount of good in the world. They're not trying to change the world, they're doing something good. Whereas the social mission now, definitely in the last few years, the choices that they're making, that the board, I presume, has been making, have been for, huge world-changing issues.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's challenging to hear that such a good cause at the outset when you join the organization could culminate and move and progress into something that is so challenging for us to digest, not to intend that pun. But I will take that as an opportunity to introduce our next couple of guests who are going to join our conversation. In the first instance, we've got Jason Eisner. Jason is founding principal of BrandQuest. BrandQuest is a leading brand change consultancy who develop marketing strategies for companies and organizations. Jason additionally holds board positions as non-executive positions for a number of non-profit organizations, including Heads Over Heel, an organization that seeks to support female entrepreneurs, JNF New South Wales, and is the current vice president of Shalom College. Welcome, Jason. And secondly, we additionally have Joel Burnie. Joel is infamous in our community, and he has over 10 continual years of active community participation through elected positions in various organizations. He's currently the Associate Director of the Public Affairs at the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council, and served as a student program coordinator and policy analyst before that. He was also president of the Australian Union of Jewish Students in 2007. Welcome, Joel. So the reason why we've brought Joel and Jason in on this conversation is not just, to bring in a Melbourneite or to have a few more people in the chat, but what I'm really curious about here is what is the tie-in between your experience, Susanna, the BDS movement at large, and indeed the changes that we're seeing in marketing and in business and in corporations at large. So Jason, I thought we could segue from the conversation Susanna was just shedding light on and the transition that Ben & Jerry's has undertaken in recent years. And I'd love to hear your insights and whether or not you've seen anything quite like this in other companies. Why do companies make these kinds of stances and decisions? And what do you think would have led Ben & Jerry's to this decision?
Wow. Well, hi there, and I'm from Sydney, so just coming that way. And I should also say at the outset here that I did live in America for 6 years, 2 years in Chicago, 4 years in Manhattan, and I totally love Israel. I'm going to say that right here and now, and I certainly don't support what they're doing, and I certainly don't support BDS, but brand. Let's talk about brand. So what is a brand? Let me start off with that, and then we can I might be able to peel back Lexi's questions, and hopefully I'll get to all of them. But let's just start with brand, because everybody has a different definition of what brand is, right? So, and when we say brand and marketing, what does that all mean? But for my purposes, and I'd say for the purposes of tonight, what we see it as, if you were to take all the touch points in an organization, including the people within, create a person out of that, and you were to meet that person on the street, you really only have to answer two questions. That brand has to answer two questions. Why you? Why would someone buy from you? And who are you? What makes you tick? Your heart. It's kind of like mind and heart. Just be able to answer those two questions, and the people within it are really important. And here's the point. You have to do that consistently. And so the first question is, you have to ask yourself, has Ben & Jerry been consistent in what they've done here? And Susanna says, no, it hasn't been consistent, because she's saying, when we started off the brand, it wasn't, it was all nice. It was a nice brand, and now we've become much more political. But remember, we're only talking about, this is not talking about to Susanna, it's talking to the customers of Ben & Jerry's, whoever they might be. Now, we also have heard from Susanna that maybe this is a company that is a social justice company that actually sells ice cream on the side, right? Like, it's a pretty interesting company in and of itself. But one of the things that's really interesting here is, for the customers that they have, is this consistent with what they would do? And remember, we're talking about America here. We're not talking about Australia. In America, there's a lot more progressive. Susanna, you tell me here now, there are a lot of people that don't like Israel who are Jewish, and that's an unfortunate thing which we don't see here. And so you have to ask yourself, have they done something that's consistent with the customers that they have in the US, and are they doing it in the right way? And then you have to, the second question you have to ask yourself is, by making people mad, like other people mad, are they actually endearing themselves more to the customers that they have? And one of the questions that that brings up, and Lexi asked me this, is there a brand that's similar? So Nike, 2018, I would like to point out, there was this black guy from the NFL called Kaepernick, and I think I pronounced it right here because, I'm coming from here and I don't follow NFL, but Kaepernick sat down in 2016, took a kneel. He didn't stand for the American anthem. And again, Susanna, talk to me here. Not standing for the American anthem is like sacrilege in Australia.
We have a favor for him.
Yeah, exactly. And now Kaepernick is actually part of, if you look at it, they've actually got a whole social justice thing happening there. So there are brands. Nike took a risk on that and said, oh my goodness, we're gonna promote him. And that was a really big cause. So has things changed? Maybe the world, maybe in America, there's this whole movement about purpose and why you do things. And a lot of big CEOs are now going, well, I've made all my money, I've got to have a purpose here. Maybe it's become more political, more people are getting involved in this. But you have to go back to this whole thing. Has Ben & Jerry's, for their main customer base, done anything that's actually inconsistent with who they are as a person? And I kind of think they've been consistent, even though we don't like it. I think they've been consistent to that. And I don't agree with it. They've been consistent to it.
So yeah, I think a few things. So there is a big part of Ben & Jerry's customer base that you are at the big concert festivals and they're doing letter signing and like the young college crowd. But also like Ben & Jerry's has the franchises, which are independently owned. I've been doing a lot of work with franchises over the years. The franchises are located in very fancy neighborhoods for the most part. There's a few that are in like downtown, that are little hole in the walls, but many of them are beautiful, beautiful shops that the independent franchisees have invested a lot of money into, and they're in, golf course communities and inside casinos and, Las Vegas and, on vacation islands. Like there's very high class people that, not to say that high class people are not going to be uber progressive, because they are, but yeah, I mean, I don't have the analytical skills for branding that you do. But it's hard to know exactly what they're going for. Maybe they're just going for ultimately the anti-Israel crowd and the college crowd. But I can tell you that there are franchisees who have put a lot of money into, their beautiful stores, who are also Zionists and are pretty mad right now, so those are very important stakeholders in this company, and they're being ignored, and they serve a lot of ice cream. So I don't quite know what's going to happen. Do the golf course communities and the casino people want this? I don't know.
And Jason, with that in mind, where do you see this branding, whether it's a stunt or a genuine political stance, where do you see this branding move impacting Ben & Jerry's going forward? Is it going to be a positive outcry? Are there going to be positive results for Ben & Jerry's, like we've seen with Nike? Where do you see this going?
I think. Is it going to be positive? We don't know they know their customer base a lot more. I think Susanna brings up some really interesting points. You might make an external message out there. If you don't bring your internal people along for that journey, and I'm obviously not part of and know what that is, then you have some issues happening, and we're seeing that happening. And I think the second part is, and this is the broader thing that I don't know if they've really thought this through, is Unilever. So there's a huge reputational risk that's happened now. If I put my reputational risk hat on from a board level, I think Unilever was, let's just try and work this out. Ben & Jerry's sold out, 10, 15, 21 years ago to Unilever, but they kept a social board, and that social board and that was the way they were going to keep policy, keep the true nature of who it is that is special about being Ben & Jerry's. And they had this outside, it's kind of like an outside board, but didn't have money control, I believe. And this board is set with the direction. So here, the thing I think what we're seeing is, the effect here is Unilever. They have a huge reputational tightrope to walk here, because they've kind of said that they'll keep this brand going, but at the same time, they're getting a lot of flack from lots of countries. I mean, lots of states within the US, just before we even talk about Israel. So I think there's, I think this is a pretty interesting tightrope for Unilever. And even if Ben & Jerry's does okay, I can't see it how it's any good for Unilever. It just can't, it's just not looking good. If there are states in the US that are telling Unilever, if your investment fund is domiciled in that state of Florida or Texas, and you happen to be holding shares in Unilever as a pension fund, you have to divest that, because you've just kind of broken a whole lot of laws because of that. I think there's a huge amount of reputational effect on that, which is good, because hopefully that might start to bring this into line. The only other company you can think about that we didn't talk about was Airbnb, which also tried to do this back a couple of years ago. And again, they had to they had turned their decision around when they worked out the flak that might occur from there. Anyway.
Jason, I might hold that there and take this as an opportunity to bring Joel in. When we're speaking about Airbnb, we're speaking about these other corporations that have been brought into the BDS movement at large. Joel, your expertise includes an extensive knowledge, an intimate knowledge of the BDS movement. Can you shed some light on the overlap between Ben and Jerry's decision and the BDS movement?
So I think, I don't know if so much of an overlap as a part, it goes hand in hand, they're one of the same. Look, working our way backwards for a little bit, I'll make a statement and then we'll go on a bit of a journey. This is probably one of the most damaging decisions that's happened since the BDS movement informally spawned out of the Durban Conference Against Racism and Xenophobia in 2001, and then was formalized and created by Omar Barghouti in 2005 after the conclusion of the Second Intifada. So you had this United Nations-backed conference in South Africa in 2001, which essentially turned out to be a very well-organized and premeditated Jew-hating fest. And what happened was that there was a marriage between the pro-Palestinian solidarity movement and elements of the anti-apartheid activists in South Africa, and they sort of married together and thought to themselves, well, why don't you use the tactics that we utilized under apartheid that was so effective in generating such sympathy for our plight internationally with the boycotts and things like this? Why don't you, as the Palestinian solidarity movement, do that as well? Now, because of the violence of the Second Intifada, Omar Barghouti essentially says to himself, well, we'll marry the two and we'll create this non-violent movement where we can essentially, keep the pressure up against Israel. Now, just as a side note before we move on, Omar Barghouti, this guy that I keep talking about, he's born in Qatar to Palestinian parents, grew up in Egypt, moved to the United States where he received his undergraduate degree at Columbia University, where he then meets an Arab Israeli woman, marries her, and then becomes a resident of Israel. Okay? So he wasn't born in Khan Yunis or Gaza City. He wasn't born in Ramallah or Nablus or Jenin. He didn't even make it to Israel or Palestine. I don't think he's lived ever in Palestine, in the West Bank or Gaza. But he starts this movement whilst he's just graduated from Tel Aviv University. Right, and the instigation was an academic boycott. Now, it spawns into this formal organization called the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Movement. And apart from being anti-two states, apart from being anti-normalization between the Israelis and the Palestinians, it's incredibly anti-Israel. It demonizes Israel. It subjects Israel to a double standard. And it also attempts clearly to delegitimize Israel by primarily using the apartheid smear. Those are the 3 Ds that defined anti-Semitism by the great Natan Sharansky. And I think it's quite clear that the motivations behind the movement of BDS, in my opinion, is clearly anti-Semitic. So then we move on to the recent decision of Ben and Jerry's. And the decision is huge, and the reason why it's big is because it's another large corporation that has decided to do something from a commercial sense to make a statement against Israel. Now, whether or not this came out of the recent conflict, or whether or not the recent conflict was the final straw, I think it's more the latter than the former. BDS was generally confined to the universities, where you would have these resolutions trying to stop academics or sharing of information between educational institutions. Some artists, not huge artists, but some artists would boycott through the cultural boycott. So Lorde from New Zealand, for instance, Elvis Costello, for instance. So these are relatively big names. However, Bon Jovi went there, Elton John went there, the Boss went there. So for every one sort of C plus singer that boycotted, there's an A plus that went into Israel anyway. But the difference is that Ben and Jerry's is such a large multinational company. By boycotting, it's something different. It's off the university campuses. Now, whether or not it ultimately has a huge impact on the hearts and minds of the world to feel some type of solidarity with Ben and Jerry's mission statement of wanting to boycott Israel, or whether or not it triggers more companies to do something similar, we just don't know yet. But what is for sure is that it's a coordinated attempt by certain groups, primarily in the United States, but also through the interconnected international pro-Palestinian network, to continue the demonization of Israel through the BDS movement. Now, luckily, in Australia, we are far more immune to the negative impacts of BDS than what the Jewish community is in the United States, for instance, or in parts of Europe. Politically speaking, even the Greens, which isn't a friend of Israel, publicly does not support the BDS campaign. Now, I say that even though I'm sure that some members of parliament, some Green members of parliament actually do support it, maybe not publicly, and I have no doubt that a number of their supporters, their voters support it as well. But it does not have mainstream political support here in Australia. However, there have been some things that they've tried and they have been close to being successful. And in a couple of years' time, depending on what goes on in the region, they might end up being more successful. And a recent regional example is in New Zealand. The New Zealand government super fund divested from 5 Israeli banks on human rights issues. Now, that was a $6.5 million divestment, so not massive, but big. And what made it even worse is that this is the government-owned super fund. So a representative from the government of New Zealand decided to send its advice to its fund to say, on human rights grounds, we're going to divest from 5 Israeli banking institutions. So in summing up, this is an insidious movement. Its only purpose is to completely delegitimize Israel, demonize Israel, and subject Israel to double standards. Those that will claim, well, you know, I'm a Jew and I'm not Zionist, so you can be anti-Zionist, but not be anti-Semitic. Really, generally speaking, and people may find this contentious, I think that's just playing on syntax, right? If you deny the self-determination of the Jewish people to live in their biblical homeland, but you have no problem with any other nation or their national identity, you're an anti-Semite. Simples. That's, I can't really sum it up any simpler than that. But in saying that, going back to the topic, this is a difference. And I hope that this is not a catalyst for more corporations to do similar.
And Joel, thank you for wow, that wealth of information, but also putting the Australian and the local slant on this bigger issue that we're seeing here. Susanna, I'm curious how this makes you feel. You know, it's a big claim for Joel, someone who's engaged with, worked with, and spoken about BDS at length to us tonight, but in his career at large, to claim that this is one of the biggest moves for progress for the BDS movement since its formation. As someone who is intimately involved in the situation at hand here, and as a former employee of Ben & Jerry's, how does that make you feel, and how have you been kind of relating to the story of you been calling this an act of BDS? Yeah, just your reflections.
Well, as this was building up, I mean, I felt like this is like this little thing that's in my head and it's about to go out into the whole world. And I thought, could this thing that's inside my head really be something that could have such, you know, a huge impact on the world? It was a very strange position to be in. In my conversations within the company, I initially told them about BDS, and I said, you know, BDS has you know, really nefarious motives, and you can't listen to these people. And I was assured by the social mission person who agreed with me. He said, oh, no, we don't listen to BDS. We don't do that. We agree. He said, we listen to mainstream organizations like the UN and Human Rights Watch. And you know, and I had to go back and do some more research to prepare, because I really didn't know about the Human Rights Watch report that was written, that was published in April. So I learned about that, and I got a lot of help in helping to figure out what talking points I would use. But the Human Rights Watch report, I think those of us here know that Human Rights Watch and UN are not so mainstream when it comes to Israel. But people who are maybe not so knowledgeable or prefer to remain not so knowledgeable don't know that. It could be that they felt like they were just doing the right thing because the UN says that Israel is, is an aggressor here. But the Human Rights Watch report absolutely uses terminology like apartheid, genocide. It does not acknowledge that the PA, the Palestinian Authority, the government of the Palestinian towns within Judea and Samaria even exists. It's not even mentioned. It doesn't mention the Oslo Agreement, any changes that were made in '95. So it starts from that premise that there are inequalities within Israeli towns and Palestinian towns within Judea and Samaria, and then explains how this is apartheid without acknowledging at all that they have separate governments, and without acknowledge, and then also continuing the lie that the Palestinians can't use the roads or the stores or can't ever enter Jewish towns, or the checkpoints are only for them. Any of us, I'm sitting in Ma'ale Adumim right now. In fact, I drove here, there were Palestinian cars on the road, the industrial area down the street, the mall within Ma'ale Adumim. Half the shoppers there are Arab that come from the surrounding towns. Any of us who've spent time in Israel know how it actually is. But the people that I spoke to said that this might be my opinion, but I can't deny that that Judea and Samaria, the Occupied Palestinian Territories, the OPT as they called it, are a military occupation. And I said, well, no, they're not. There are no Israeli soldiers within those towns. Even surrounding those towns, they're at the junctions to protect Jews and to protect Arabs as well. I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent there. So
no, by all means, feel free to go off on any and all tangents.
Okay.
But I might pick up on something that you spoke about. You spoke about the research that you did in preparing yourself to arm yourself with the knowledge to talk to your superiors, to talk to the corporation, and to fight untruths being shared. And Jason, I might put this back to you. Something that we're seeing in the corporate world, corporate America, but the corporate world at large, is a real push for corporate social responsibility. And I think a lot of the rhetoric behind this Ben and Jerry's story is that push from Ben and Jerry's to take that corporate social responsibility and have that at the core of their organization. We've got Susanna doing her research on the nuances of the stances that Ben and Jerry took, and the nuance of the issues and the complexities with Israel. And we have Ben and Jerry's taking a very blunt and black and white stance on the other side. What responsibility do organizations have to be informing themselves and to be taking these stances? Where is corporate social responsibility heading, and why did Ben and Jerry's kind of push to play in this area?
Wow. So we got all night. I think we've got to just go back to what's a brand. It's a person, and is it being consistent? We just have to keep on coming back to that. There are many people in the world that take the same issue that we see as is clear, and they see it as a complete. We see it as black, they see it as white, whatever. We see that all the time, and I think what you've got to do here is, I think there's two questions that happen at this point. Firstly, how much should corporations get involved with social? Like, how is that even what they should be? And I've got an interesting quote that I'll finish my talk with, but should they even be involved in this social, and how much should they do there? And what is the right of a corporation to do that? Now, I think the answer to that question is if that's how the person would behave normally to their customers, and they would expect them to behave that way, then then they probably can do that. And I think the only thing that we've got to remember here is that Ben and Jerry's, on the scale of social responsibility, if you've got a scale that goes from here to here, and I'm shaking this handle over here because it's the opposite way around, but on a scale, Ben & Jerry's is way, way up on social responsibility. In fact, I would actually argue that they are a social responsibility company that happens to make a bit of ice cream on the side that pays for all their social responsibility comments. And so they have them, and maybe, as Susanna said, and I think we've picked this up, they've probably, with their independent board, taken that to a new level than when Ben & Jerry were there. Ben & Jerry started that, but now they've just gone, taken it off the Richter scale, so to speak. And I think what you have to ask yourself is, does that work for a company? Does and the ultimate viewpoint on this is, do they get more sales? Do the sales keep on increasing? Do they make profit for their shareholders, and do they pay for their work? And if the answer is yes to that question, then for their customers that you do that, then they might be saying that they're doing the right thing. But you just have to understand, and I think this is the more important question is, well, if Ben & Jerry's does this, are there going to be all these other corporations that are going to suddenly just follow suit? And that's the real question, because we know that Ben & Jerry's is a social responsibility organization. So they're already doing that. And if you go and read them, they're getting rid of bail for, they don't want cash bail in the US. They're getting right down into some really big issues that forget the Israel. They're really trying to rip apart what's going on in the US and Black Lives Matter and all these sort of, they're right at the forefront of this. But will other companies do that? Will other organizations do that from this lead? And I think there you have to ask yourself, is it in their personality? Is that what they would do? And if you come back with an answer that actually, no, they probably wouldn't, they don't want to destroy shareholder value, they don't want to do that, you might actually have a situation where, yeah, Ben & Jerry's does this, but other organizations won't do this because, at the end of the day, they've got to make money, they've got to make profit, and they don't care about this, they want to make money. And so next question I have is, when you give a lot of oxygen to a business, then you potentially take this to a bigger level, right? Like you actually start to get other people involved in this. And the perfect example of this is Trump, right? As Trump, the more that Trump, the average bear hated Trump, the more his constituents loved him. And so you have this situation happening where, sometimes, and I'm not saying, I don't have the answer for you here, Lexi, it's a really complex question, but sometimes you just have to go, well, that's their viewpoint. We can fight against it. We totally hate it, but we don't have control over that. We can pull levers. We can make our stands. But the organization's allowed to do this. Like they're in there. They're allowed to make this. And maybe what I'll finish off with this is just the point is that Michael Jordan in 2013, we all know Michael Jordan, basketball player, was asked to support a Democratic candidate for Senate. And he didn't support them. And they asked him why. And he said, well, and just his famous line was, well, his very, monotone voice, Republicans also buy shoes, right? So you've just got to, look, I'm not really giving you the answer, Lexi, but I'm trying to give you from a brand point of view. It's dependent on whether that brand as a person can act in that way. And I'm not sure, again, I want to say to you, I don't agree with the BDS. I don't like any of those viewpoints. I fully support all these, but I'm just trying to give you an opinion from a brand point of view of why something like this might happen, and why in lots of other organizations it mightn't happen, because that's not how they would act. And I just want to point that, and so by putting more and more oxygen on this, you might actually be helping the BDS movement bring it to life. That's all I don't have an answer, but I'm just telling you from a brand point of view.
Jason, I might jump on something that you said there, just to bring it back to Susanna, and then I'll go through a couple of the questions that we're getting in the chat box before we wrap up. So, audience, if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and we'll try and get to as many as we can. But something that you touched on, Jason, and I like this quote, is that Ben & Jerry's might just be a social activism company masking as an ice cream company. Susanna, is that something you ever experienced, or is that your view on Ben & Jerry's as well?
I think it's not a bad assessment. I can say, just from having been there for so long, when I started, I had a different creative director who was very brand driven. Every design that we would put before her, she would say, okay, we're an ice cream company. Where's the taste appeal? And she said, and we're edgy. Where's the edginess? It's got to be funny. It's got to be edgy. It's got to challenge people. She didn't want it to be too cutesy. A lot of Ben & Jerry's sometimes looks cute. you know, but she's like not cute, edgy, and ice cream. We'd never forget the ice cream. And that hasn't been communicated to me in a long time. Instead, sometimes I make a lot of like custom designs for franchisees who, you know, I've mentioned are in all these different kinds of places, and sometimes franchisees want something custom in their mural that reflects their community that doesn't quite fit in with Ben and Jerry's, and we would have an internal discussion saying, well, let's see if we can get them to not make this choice, because it wouldn't be so Ben and Jerry's, you know, with the social mission in mind. It wouldn't be so Ben and Jerry's to have, you know, I don't know, I can't think of a particular example, but something relating to like a war memorial, you know, because we don't want to talk about war, or I don't know, something religious. You're like, oh yeah, I think in Brazil we're supposed to depict the giant statue. We were asked to depict the giant statue of Christ that's on a hill, and you know, it's a very significant monument in Brazil, and we're like, well, it's, you know, we don't really do Christian stuff, you know, we don't do religious stuff, it wouldn't quite fit in. So I do feel like the social mission has become, as far as my design goes, the social mission has become more important than the taste appeal itself, because we are selling ice cream, we're supposed to be.
Joel, I might bring you back into this conversation here with one of the questions that we've got come through from the audience. Thanks to Anne for her question. How long has it been fashionable for large companies to adopt BDS as a strategy to deal with a company that has an interest with Israel? And if you can also touch on that, Joel, is there a difference between the culture in the US and in Australia when it comes to companies taking those stances?
So it hasn't, from a company's perspective, it hasn't been overly fashionable at all. Realistically, it was confined to the universities through its academic boycott. So we, at this department in Australia or somewhere else, want to cut formal ties with a similar educational department at a tertiary institution in Israel, or we're not going to accept academics from there. So. And again, a few cultural things here and there. So from a corporate point of view, to do what Ben and Jerry's did, it's a recent manifestation. However, when it comes, the word fashionable is an interesting thing, because look, my assessment is that this is an example of intersectionality coming to get us, right? So intersectionality essentially is a movement that progressive movement that clumps a lot of different progressive causes together. So essentially that they can accumulate a wider base of support for each discrete cause, because if you're primarily of one cause, you support cause 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 7, 8, 9, and 10, and in return those other groups support your cause, so you amplify it, right? This anti-Zionist, anti-Israel sentiment weaponized by the BDS movement and promoted by the BDS movement through the Palestinian Solidarity Network is an intersectional movement. That's why when you have so certainly in the United States, that's why when you have pride marches, there'll be a request at some pride marches for Jews not to have Jewish symbols, because it can trigger people, right? Why? Because the intersectionalists have organized the pride march, because one of the causes in the intersectional movement is the pride movement, right? So if you are one, you can't be, you have to be, well, because the Palestinians are in your tent, you have to be for their cause, which is against us, unfortunately. So it is becoming more fashionable, certainly becoming far more fashionable in the United States, because intersectionality is far more pronounced there. However, I think that the recent conflict in Australia, we should take pause in. I think that it's seeping a little bit more into Australian culture. And I'll put it this way: when Susanna, who I would just say truly an inspiration, and the leadership that you've illustrated is, and I know from so far away, but I want you to understand that what you've done for all of us is truly inspirational. But I've just lost a little bit of my train of thought. The fact is that in Australia, it's becoming a little bit more fashionable, and because of amplified by the recent conflict, you will find it easier for this type of thing to seep into the corporate culture in Australia as well. So it can start at a more innocent level that, you know, you're at the you know, if you happen to be lucky enough to get into the office out of, you know, your home environment in the pandemic. I know a lot of people during the conflict in Melbourne, it was out of lockdown at the time, they would be asked, you know, they're the token Jew of their company, so they would be asked what their opinions are of the conflict, you know, sort of like, oh, so you're a Jew, so, you know, what's Israel doing over there? And it's just like, whoa, you know, like just because I'm Jewish, I'm somehow connected to what's going on so far away, and it's okay to come up to me and accost me and ask me. So the sensitivity around it is sort of becoming a little bit more relaxed. Luckily, with the rejection from the political class, it seems as though that the BDS movement will remain a fringe movement, hopefully in Australia. But in saying that, because it was so easily intersectionalized in the United States, the same thing can happen here.
No, thank you, Joel, and thank you for bringing it back to a local context as well, because yeah, we have Ben and Jerry's here, but I think the climate in Australia is different, and it's it's comforting to know that there are differences, but at the same time, those global messages do seep through, and you know, I like what you mentioned, I'm often singled out as the token Jew within my workplace, and I think a lot of people on the line that would resonate with them. And a lot of us, I don't know, wouldn't have the courage that Susanna has to not just be the token Jew, but to really send a message.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing on that, Lexi, if I can. They don't do it with anybody else. Okay, any other outward minority or a minority that is subjected to discrimination, or no one else would do that. But it's seemingly becoming more and more okay to do that to Jewish people, and I think that therein lies the issue, right? And you know, someone who is pro human rights and thinks that they're coming from a humanitarian streak, they'll say, well, look what Israel's doing. You know, it's oppressing people, blah 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 blah. But again, the behavior that you espouse to us as Jews is different to how you would to a Buddhist in the context of conflict in Myanmar, for instance, right? Or the Chinese diaspora population for what's going on in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs, right? No one else is subjected or somehow connected to a far-flung conflict as easy as we are to that. And I think that makes us all collectively feel uncomfortable, but also it's a clear double standard against us.
Look, keeping an eye on the time, and very appreciative of everyone who's joined us. I've just got one last question, and I'm going to pose it to each one of you with a slightly different stance. Where to from here? Jason, from a branding perspective, where to from here for Ben and Jerry's and for the corporate community at large? Joel, from a combating BDS and anti-Semitism movement and stance, where to from here in terms of advocacy in the space? And Susanna, for you, we'll finish off with you. Where to next from you? So Jason, do you want to start us off? We'll keep the comments brief if that's okay. Jason, over to you.
Look, where to from here, from Ben and Jerry's? This has got a lot more oxygen in it because of what's been happening with Israel and everything. So I think Ben and Jerry's, to its average ice cream user and people that follow the social activism, is probably going, tick, we've found another issue that we can add to our list of issues that we're going at. Even though we disagree with it, we have an issue. But I think on a reputational value thing from a Unilever, I think Unilever's got some really big discussions to have. And I would suspect that this kind of little outreach board, it's probably the only social board that they have in there. And we remember Unilever is a really big company. I mean, let's put this in perspective. I mean, probably half of the products in your house come from a Unilever company. They are everywhere, all over the supermarket and so forth. And so they're going to have to ask themselves, can we take the reputational flak for this over the whole thing? But we've just got to bear in mind that you know, the only other thing I'm going to say, and it's a little bit more controversial, is, you know, we're in Australia, bring it back to Australian issues here. You know, anything, you know, we talked about Chinese, but Chinese companies, like we've stopped our whole telecommunication system being Chinese now because we think the Chinese are taking over the world. Like there are going to be, we're not going to stop this, not for corporations are going to make these decisions. We're not going to be in control of it. And I think the only point to say on this one is that yes, we've got to stop the BDS and making sure that this doesn't turn into a BDS movement and a whole lot of companies joining on the BDS. But from a brand point of view, I think our best bet to stop this is to lobby Unilever. I reckon enough calls to Unilever and the CEO of Unilever and the chairman of Unilever, that, you know, if you are asking me how you stop this, you talk to Unilever. You certainly do not talk to Ben and Jerry's, because Ben and Jerry's are loving this. So that my kind of final thing there is, you know, if we're going to stop this, Unilever is the answer to this.
Joel, over to you.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly, Jason. And in terms of combating BDS as a whole, the key is these the potential divestment from the state-based funds in the United States that have anti-BDS legislation. So this is a test case. So there are 35 states that have some form of legislation. Some are stronger than others. But even the governor of Florida and Texas and Mayor de Blasio publicly naming and saying that there was going to be an investigation, Unilever's share price dropped 4 points in a day. Right, so so Ben and Jerry's doesn't have shareholders, Unilever does, and at the end of the day, Unilever or a corporation can care as much as it wants for humanitarian issues as Ben and Jerry's does. And whilst it might work for Ben and Jerry's, I don't think it's going to work for Unilever. So I think that's why Unilever swooped in and made their statement before Ben and Jerry's got out theirs to reinforce the fact that Unilever was safe in Israel. And also the legislation is a test case. It's going to be very important to see what happens. Two quick things from an advocacy point of view. Here in Australia, we don't. The message is don't give any ground. Don't entertain the idea that BDS is nothing but an anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic campaign to delegitimize, demonize Israel and subject Israel to double standards, because that's exactly what it is. It's nefarious, it's evil, and it needs to remain the fringe group and fringe cause that it is here in Australia. So we need to remain steadfast in that and call it out swiftly and call it out as strongly as we currently do. And finally, eat Haagen-Dazs. It's great. It's kosher. Salted caramel is fantastic. I will say it's probably creamier than Ben and Jerry's, and there are other ice cream alternatives out there. So Haagen-Dazs all the way.
And Susanna, bearing in mind your ice cream preferences, but we'll put those to the side. Just to finish us off tonight, where to next for you?
Oh, thank you. Well, I had such a huge outpouring of support. There were job offers within there too, and lots of nice connections. As you can see, I'm in Israel. I took advantage of some of my new friends to get a rare permit to enter Israel. So here I am. I'm gonna go meet with the CEO of Ben & Jerry's Israel in a couple of days, taking the whole family, and apparently the news is coming. But it should be fun. I've spoken to him before. He's a lovely person, and I expect to find work. I think I thank everybody for their support. The people that I would really look to right now are the franchisees, and people involved in distribution. Really the franchisees, because there are franchisees who have invested a huge amount of money. I saw a couple of days ago a franchisee that owns a shop on the Upper West Side in New York City. A beautiful statement, pro-Israel statement. They said that they're giving 10% of their profits, Meiser, to Israel, to Israeli educational funds. And there was this very bold picture of father and son who run the shop, standing very soberly behind the counter with their arms around each other. And I would look to see, and then also people within Unilever. I don't know anybody really so much in Jews within Unilever, but I've heard that there's some ripple effect. I would like to see what other Jews who have really more at stake than a job. A real investment are going to be doing. I'll be really interested in seeing what happens there. I think that Jews are, if anything, what I did, which I consider kind of small, but what I did, I hope that it inspires other people to step up and speak out for Israel and speak out for not just Israel, but like Am Yisrael, like for our people. These are our people, and we're all affected. I mean, there are Jews getting beaten on the streets for perceived support of Israel, whether they support Israel or not. We're back to Jews being beaten on the streets. It's happening in big cities all over the country, all over the world, and they're using this excuse to do it. And so we owe it to each other to stand up and speak up for our fellow.
Thank you, Susanna. And on behalf of Northeastern Jewish Center and Zionism Victoria, I cannot thank our panelists enough for joining us tonight. And I cannot thank the audience as well for joining us for what has been a really rich and important conversation. To Joel and Jason, thank you for sharing your professional insights. I know firsthand when I read headlines like this one on July 19, it can be overwhelming. So to have the insights from both of you, from a branding perspective and from an advocacy perspective, to weigh in and help inform the fury that I was feeling, that a lot of us were feeling, and how we can act upon that is invaluable. And to Susanna for sharing your firsthand insights. It takes courage to make the steps that you've done. So on behalf of everyone here tonight, I just want to extend our gratitude for your courage and for your strength. And lastly, a conversation like this is no good unless there is that so what and that next step. So to all of those who've joined us on the call tonight, Zionism Victoria does have a petition that we're collecting signatures for, and we're taking action in line with the recommendations that Susanna and Jason and Joel have raised tonight. So we'll be circulating that petition, but look out for it on our social media as well. And please do share it around and sign. And that's it. We're almost on time, which I think is pretty good for a Jewish event. So thank you very much, and hope you all have a lovely Sunday evening.
Thank you.
Nice. Thank you.